Greetings all! About 2 years ago, in response to a number of claims that anti-tank missiles, drones and the like would spell the end of the tank, I put out a video entitled, "No, the tank is not dead." And I explained why this was so. The bottom line was that, well, until something was developed which can do what a tank does, but better, it's going to stay a high demand item. And sure enough, as countries start to increase their tank fleets, or in the case of the Netherlands, decide that they actually need to buy some again, aside from the ones that they lease, but no matter. It seems that the powers that are apparently in some agreement. Then, a few months ago, we started seeing a bunch of claims about the attack helicopter being obsolete given their vulnerability to man-portable systems or even FPV drones used as guided missiles. The argument in favor of the attack helicopter remains the same. It can do things that nothing else can. Now, immediately someone will try to bring up the case of Japan, which has announced its withdrawal of pretty much its entire attack helicopter fleet in favor of replacement by drones, as evidence of the obsolescence of the platform, much as folks tried to bring up the US Marines divesting themselves of tanks during the tank discussion. But at the same time, Poland has just announced buying almost 100 Apaches. The problem with framing the discussion is that people don't understand the primary function of the attack helicopter today. This is because, unlike the tank, the primary function of the Helo has changed over time. What the attack helicopter was originally designed to do can indeed be pretty much achieved by other assets, maybe cheaper or better. But what the helicopter does today cannot be done by other assets. The question is whether or not you actually need those capabilities, and a lot of militaries don't. Now, I've been wanting to do this video for a while, but until recently I haven't had the time to check the publicly released manuals and training videos to make sure everything I'm going to say is open source, since we need to go into operational constructs. After spending the last 4 years in 2 Armored Division headquarters, I've learned quite a lot about higher echelon operations, which I did not know before then. But they never tell you exactly what's public or not when you're learning it. But anyway, I've had the time now to look it up. So, hopefully, as you are framing your academic papers, lobbying your Congress critter, or just having useless arguments on the internet, or whatever, this will put a bit of perspective into things. So, how has the function of the attack helicopter changed over time? When the AH-64 battalions entered service, they were in effect the modern take on the World War II tank destroyer battalion, a divisional or regimental asset which was fragile but highly mobile, well armed, and optimized for responding to enemy armored assaults. A flight of 4 AH-64s crewed by 8 guys could respond to an enemy massed attack 50 miles away in under half an hour and could destroy an entire tank battalion with plenty of ammunition left over. I'm sure you've seen the sort of image of the Apaches and the tanks all working together to blow up an evil red commie tank battalion. Now, officially, the manual describes this sort of action as an attack in support of troops in close contact. More commonly, you hear it as an attack in contact or as an over-the-shoulder attack. It's how we've been using Apaches for most of the last 2 decades in the War on Terror. But in large-scale combat, it's also nearly suicidal. The front lines have simply gotten far too dangerous, and though such activities are indeed still in the manual, they are not the preferred usage for the attack helicopters. With the proliferation of anti-tank missiles down to the squad level and really damn good tanks, a NATO unit should be able to hold its own in battle without requiring subjecting an Apache or Tiger to the engagement envelopes of the masses of Pantsers, Tunguskas, Manpads, or anything else which potential adversaries tend to have in numbers at the front line. If you really do need to send a slow-flying aircraft with anti-tank missiles into that environment, save a life or 2 and use one with no humans aboard. NATO figured this out years ago. But if attack helicopters are no longer primarily used in close combat, what are they used for? So for the short version, I will let somebody with a little bit more rank than me have a word. This is Major General Eisenhower, formerly my CG at 1st Armored.
But it's important that you recognize at the division level, ABCTs are maneuver units. But the division's got responsibility for the division deep fight. And your maneuver unit, as a division commander, is the Apache battalions. Right? So no longer are we kind of in the business of the pink team overhead or in direct support over an infantry platoon or a tank platoon, but we're using those as maneuver elements to set conditions so that when the enemy comes in towards the close area or when the ABCTs reach the enemy, the COFRMs are right, where it's just not a fight.
Okay, so what does that mean? Well, how does it work to a layman? The first thing is he described the helicopters as a maneuver asset. Now, way back in the day, when I was a mere 1LT at the Maneuver Captain's Career Course, we generally spoke about aviation as a fires asset. And there were two reasons for this. Firstly, doctrine hadn't quite morphed to the extent we have today. So if you look at the aviation manual from 1997, for example, you will see that while they do describe aviation as a maneuver asset, there is something of a priority given towards performing fires roles. The other reason is that, well, as a captain or maybe a major, at the company and battalion level would never be using the attack helicopters as a maneuver asset instead of as a fire asset. For this mission, you will be supported by an attack helicopter company. And the reality is that all you're going to do is tell them what you need blown up to support you, just as you would with artillery. That doesn't apply at division level. There's probably a bit of a misunderstanding as to just what a division or higher does. So to quote my current CG, he is mildly interested in what his brigades are up to. He has perfectly competent full colonels running them. Once they're in the fight, the division commander's job is done as regards the brigades, and he's looking forward to the next fight, which is determined by what is defined as the division deep, which now brings us to battlefield construct. A unit's area is defined as rear, close, and deep. Subordinate maneuver units play in the close area. So, for a corps close area, it's the boxes that the corps has given to the divisions to control. For a division close area, it's the play boxes that they've given to the brigades. For a brigade close, it's the area the battalions get to move in. Anything behind that is the rear area. So that's mainly logistics, admin, security taskings, but anything in front of the subordinate unit's play box is the deep. So the division deep is further behind the front line than the brigades are allowed to play in. And the brigade areas will normally cross over the front line as it is. So a division looks to see what battles the brigade might be involved in from 24 to 72 hours out, and sets the conditions so that when the brigades do make contact, it's not a fair fight. Now, those conditions could be related to anything considered important, be it logistics nodes, command nodes, destroying artillery, engineering abilities, or even just killing line battalions. But we're talking operations scores of kilometers behind the front line. There are various assets available to a division commander to do this, but most of them are considered fires. Long-range rockets, missiles, airstrikes from the Air Force, electronic attack, information warfare. Maneuver has its own definition, quote, employment of forces in the operational area through movement in combination with fires and information to achieve a position of advantage in respect to the enemy. Brigades, well, they're maneuver units, that's what they do. But they're used in the division close. Even the division cavalry squadron, if one is available, and it is a division commander's maneuver unit, obviously is only going to be able to get so far, if at all, beyond the front line. Thus, the only unit which can move and fight in the deep area is going to be the helicopter. Remember, we're not talking about some place within 1 or 2 dozen kilometers of the front line and thus within reliable radio range of a base station for a UAS. We are talking some serious distance here, and that's at the division level. You can imagine the distances that the corps commander is looking to affect. Now, the advantage here is that however dense the air defenses are at the front line, they are a lot less dense once you go a score or 2 kilometers into the rear. The trick is getting through that front line, which I guarantee is going to be a subject of division artillery, if nothing else, and then you still go on for a few kilometers. Something which you will note that the Ukrainians have managed to do with their drones, or cruise missiles if you prefer, which are made from converted general aviation aircraft. Think something that looks like a Cessna with a radio controller. One might think that a capable Air Force and air defense system might have something to say about that sort of thing in conventional combat though. Well, it can be done. It takes good planning, and it also takes something which some militaries have, which, say, the Russians and Ukrainians don't, and that's an air force with NATO-level capabilities. So, doubtless you are familiar with Red Flag. Big war games that the Air Force runs in Nevada with a competent enemy air force and air defense network. The sort of challenge which might affect a couple of Apache battalions trying to work their way a few kilometers into the enemy rear area, right?
But no kidding, we integrated literally, beneath the Red Flag exercise. So we had 5th gen aircraft, I think dozens, doing what the Air Force is really good at, setting conditions electronically, conducting what amounted to JSEED to support our deep attack infiltration into what became a raid for 2 Apache battalions. 566 kilometers round trip.
No, you didn't mishear that distance. Now, even if you assume that the Apaches were based a couple of dozen kilometers behind the front line in safe, well, relatively safe terrain, that is a serious depth of penetration. Now, remember what I said about the firepower. 4 Apaches can wipe out a battalion. The attack that the general was describing was 24 Apaches. So these are capable of flying at or below treetop level, depending on the gaps in the trees, capable of identifying and prioritizing their own targets, all done without any emissions, which could be jammed, signal lost, or which could be used to locate the transmitting aircraft, and also there's no lag involved. And when you get there, a target that far behind the front line isn't going to be swarming with low altitude air defense systems. Whatever would be on the receiving end of this raid would have been absolutely schwacked. The next day, maybe those same gunships can be used to provide fire support to an air assault. If it's safe enough for the transport helicopters, it's safe enough for the gunships. And at this time, there is nothing else in an inventory which can reliably do this. Now, if your nation's operational constructs don't require such capabilities, then there is less of an argument for the attack helicopter. In the case of Japan, for example, that distance traveled in the exercise is the same as flying all the way across Honshu from the Pacific to the Sea of Japan and back. Something had likely gone seriously wrong for the Japanese self-defense forces if that's the sort of scale that they're fighting over. If, however, you are configuring to fight at the scale of a NATO country, maybe in Eastern Europe, you would want to think long and hard before divesting your attack helicopters in favor of another asset, just because that other asset can do some of the things an attack helicopter does. Poland is not Japan. It has different needs, and just because Japan has decided its needs don't require an Apache, doesn't mean that Poland feels it doesn't. So there you go. No, the attack helicopter is not dead. Take care.